What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. In Pokemon Black 2, completing the National Pokedex is easily the most lengthy achievement in the entire game, as you have to obtain 649 Pokemon across multiple games and generations. In my opinion, this is one of the hardest Pokedexes to complete, and I finished the entire thing in a little over a week. And this is how it went. So if you're unaware, this is part of my quest to obtain every medal in Black 2 that I did a couple months ago, and although I did showcase completing both the regional and the national Pokedex, I glossed over pretty much the entire process due to just how many different avenues you have to take to obtain every Pokemon. Because I'm starting the game from scratch, the entirety of the first day is basically centered around making progress in the story. After taking a vote with my chat, they chose Snivy as my starter Pokemon, which immediately adds a task of trading to get the other two to our very long list of objectives in the challenge. Once I went through some introductory events, I was ready to leave our hometown, where immediately I was already having trouble with my goal. It's a Purloin! That does not bode well. After grabbing a couple new Pokemon at Flacessi Ranch, I started working my way through the main story of the game. Because the actual goal of the challenge at the time was to get every medal, the first 2 days really didn't focus on capturing any new Pokemon other than getting some strong team members. But there were a lot of situations where you're basically given encounters in order to progress in the story. Most importantly, receiving Zorua from Rude in Driftfield City. So no surprise, there are a lot of Pokemon that are only obtainable once through specific events, and although this one is guaranteed if you just make it far enough in the region, some others aren't that simple. After about 8 hours of playing through the story, I'd obtained all the gym badges with really nothing to show Pokedex-wise. I was able to evolve a decent amount of the few that I collected, but the main goal was to finish the game, which realistically is a better plan to save everything for the post-game, as I'll have stronger Pokemon, better items, and most importantly, more money to spend. This doesn't mean that I didn't stop for a few important ones. I can get it right now? Unlike the original Black and White games, the Swords of Justice are moved from their secret locations and are kind of just plopped in the middle of the road for us to get. Now I know what you're thinking. Catching a legendary at this point in the game must be kind of difficult, right? I mean, you haven't even reached the point where you can buy the special Pokeballs. Well, I guess Game Freak figured that people thought Gens 1 through 4 were way too hard to catch Pokemon, so they amplified the catch rate to the point that catching legendaries in the weakest Pokeball possible is manageable in a single attempt. While this may make it sound like the entire game is going to be a cakewalk, there's still over 600 Pokemon that need to be obtained, but maybe we should start a little smaller. In a way, the regional Pokedex is seen as the baseline for completing the entire game. You gotta catch them all, so here's pretty much everything you see before you complete the main storyline of the game. While this is only a taste of the full experience, Black 2 and White 2 are a little different. Unlike the previous generations where you can see 200 or even as low as 150 Pokemon, these games are absolutely loaded with encounters. Aside from maybe the X and Y regional dexes if you combine them all together, the Black 2 Pokedex contains the largest game that offers a regional and national Pokedex with a staggering 300 encounterable Pokemon in the main storyline. This means that nearly half of the entire history of Pokemon is in this one Pokedex, so most routes that you're going to visit are going to be filled with at least 4 to 5 new Pokemon. After spending a day and a half making my way through the entire storyline, I had obtained 22 Pokemon. Fantastic. But by this point, I managed to travel to every location in the game, so with the entire region in the palm of my hand, I got to work. I decided to spend the later part of the second day going to a few areas and catching nearly everything available, and I started in alphabetical order with the Abundant Shrine. Well, this is a weird way to go about it. With the spreadsheet that I made of the entire Pokedex, I was able to sort it A through Z and see exactly what is required from each area, rather than constantly checking online to make sure that I'm not missing something and having to check the Pokedex to make sure I don't already have it. After half an hour, I made it to the top of Celestial Tower, which instantly distracted me into working onto another small section of the dex. In the southern section of Route 20, we can meet with Professor Juniper in the Cave of Being, which initiates the side quest tracking down all of the lake spirits. I made my way back to the tower to catch Mesprit, and we'll come back to the other two once I've made it farther in the alphabetical list. After clearing through Chargestone Cave and Clay's Tunnel, I finished the day with 58 Pokemon, or just about 20% of the regional unit of Pokedex. But tomorrow was gonna be a lot different. At this point in the Medal Challenge, I was on the hunt for any Pokemon to add to my Pokedex, and with the fact that I was going to be gaming all day, I knew that I was going to make a huge dent in both Pokedexes. But in order to do that, I was gonna need to be prepared. I decided to go a little off path and make my way into Reversal Mountain. Inside, we can talk to the scientists, who will reward us with a TM if we manage to catch every Pokemon that's available within this area. So after a few minutes of catching everything, we're able to unlock False Swipe, which means that we're now going to need to pick our lead catching machine. There are so many options: Gallade, Scizor, maybe even Zangoose. No. I want him. For some reason, Cobalion can learn False Swipe, and coincidentally, it was by far the strongest Pokemon on my team. I had full intentions of getting something easy like Weavile, but thankfully, I can immediately jump into filling my decks. Now, when it comes to the catching aspect, I'm obviously using the best Pokeballs. Quick Balls to hopefully catch a first turn, and Dust Balls for basically every other situation. Because there isn't a day-night cycle for encounters in these games, I can just set the time to night and basically catch everything in 1 or 2 throws. Even low catch rate Pokemon like Skarmory have nearly a 20% chance at night, so I knew that the real challenge wasn't going to be catching them, it was going to be finding them. Remember how I had that plan of going to each and every location in alphabetical order? Throw that out. Because I was finding a lot of National Dex Pokemon, I decided to target exclusively the regional members, and I just went in the Pokedex order. Is this faster? Probably not, but realistically this is going to be just as efficient, and at the time it felt like I had a better gauge onto how close I was completing it. Although for the most part I was just running in the grass catching whatever I needed, I did have to mess around with a few mechanics. Most importantly, the shaking grass. For a majority of your encounters you'll probably see Auto-No no matter where you are in the region, but there is a small chance that you'll find a rare encounter like a fully evolved Pokemon or a stone evolution. Although this does make the process of getting through the Pokedex a lot easier, there are actually some Pokemon that can only be found exclusively through this encounter method, most notably the elemental monkeys. After an hour of hunting, I managed to make my way to the southeastern section of the region, which led me to obtaining the Magma Stone for later, as well as having a battle with Colress on his ship near the P2 laboratory. After defeating him, I was able to get another Master Ball, which obviously can save time compared to spending turns catching a legendary, and there are definitely a lot to choose from. Although by this point I'd only caught the 3 Swords of Justice, there were another 11 legendary encounters per version, with quite a few of them being version exclusives, resulting in obtaining a large chunk of the previous 2 generations of games. I ended up using my first Master Ball on Latios because of how useful it was in competitive play, but at the end of the day, any option is a good choice. From here I started making progress clearing out more of the late and post-game areas of the map, which resulted in some interesting results. At the park where they're planning the whole thing. With it wasn't me. I didn't do it. I don't know what I did. I'm sorry. After making my way through the Relic Castle, Route 23, and Route 4, I made it far enough in the decks where I had to obtain some fossils. Deep in Twist Mountain, you can receive a random fossil every day from this construction worker, and although you can't exactly guarantee getting a certain one, if you save beforehand, you receive a different option every single time. I remember there was actually another fossil that you could obtain in Nacrene City, so I made my way to the museum to get another, only to be stopped by the leader of Ugly Gen 4 Pokemon. After catching Uxie, Lenora gives us the option of receiving either the cover or the plume fossil, which you actually can't receive from the fossil worker in the mountain. For this, I decided to get the plume fossil, but getting the other version exclusive will take a bit more work. Through the FunFest missions, you can collect a ridiculously large list of items, and after completing some item finding missions, you can unlock Forgotten Lost items. With this, you can obtain the opposite fossil, but it's obviously extremely rare, and with only 2 minutes to attempt it, you're probably... This also allowed me to get some rare trait evolution items, and this will essentially be the source for the mass amount of duplicate evolution stones and unique items to finish the decks. From here, I made my way to Route 12 to fill up more of the decks, which is when I came across an interesting situation. Oh, B. I need to get a female one. Now, obviously getting a female Combi isn't that difficult. It's a 12.5% chance for every encounter, but it was revealed to me that you can make this process a whole lot easier. After completing FunFest missions, you can earn pass orbs that can be redeemed at the entry for timed in-game buffs to your character. This can change things like the amount of experience that you earn, the ability to hatch eggs faster, and even change the way that you encounter Pokemon. After increasing my entry level, I was able to equip Lucky Power, which increases the chances of encountering low percentage Pokemon. While Vespiquen isn't encounterable in the regular grass on Route 12, you can find it through the shaking grass at 5%, and needless to say, this feature was pretty good. So now the tables are flipped. See? That was definitely worth it then. Because most routes have at least one 5% spawn of a rare or stone evolution Pokemon, we can take advantage of this pass power and save an enormous amount of time searching for additional items or even having to grind friendship evolutions, which arguably take more time than anything else in a Pokemon game. While this doesn't necessarily make it a surefire thing that I'll instantly find every rare Pokemon that I need, it'll heavily cut down the time spent if I didn't use it. There was, however, one exception. At the village bridge, you're able to encounter Azumarill and Lapras in the rippling spots in the water, which is the only location in the entire game where you can find one. While many other shaking Pokemon took a few minutes, Lapras wasn't feeling it. Because the whole concept of pass powers is heavily underdocumented, I wasn't sure if the pass power even worked on water Pokemon, and to this day, I'm still not even confident about it. Considering that it takes significantly longer for a patch to appear on the water, I was averaging maybe 3 encounters per time the pass power was active, so you can imagine that after a half an hour, I was a little over dealing with finding it. No, don't get excited. Shut up, chat, shut up. Don't get excited. He does not deserve this. It also has Perish Song. I forgot about that. So if I fail this, I have to look for it again. From here, I tackled more post-game areas and even worked on evolving some of the more difficult members that I obtained earlier in the challenge. My Woobat! My friendship! I killed you and you still love me. I didn't even know that could happen. Upon reaching the bottom half of the Dex, I started working on some more difficult high-level evolutions. If you know anything about the Gen 5 games, a large portion of the final evolutions in the Unova region are at pretty ridiculous levels, to the point where in the original games, some Pokemon like Mandibuzz and Klinklang were Pokemon that you could obtain in the main story, but were probably not even evolved by the time you reached the Elite Four. In challenges like these, it's important to take advantage of any opportunities to avoid level grinding, and Dino is a prime example. Although it finally evolves into Hydreigon at level 64, I found that its wireless is available at almost level 50 near En's castle. While I did manage to find that, this location also contains a little bit more that we can do. I was able to battle N and receive the stone to gain access to challenge Zekrom at Dragon Spiral Tower. As most of you know, Reshiram is a version exclusive that in no way can be caught naturally in Black 2, but this situation is going to be resolved pretty quickly. After heading in the giant chasm to catch the other half of the box legendary, I reached a pretty significant milestone. With catching Kyurem, I now currently have 175 Pokemon in the Dex, which I know does not sound like a lot of Pokemon, but we caught every line of Pokemon. So the only thing we have to do is either evolve the Pokemon or breed the Pokemon. It shouldn't take really that long to do all of them. All that remains in the regional Pokedex are Pokemon that you can obtain in Black 2, as well as the option-based Pokemon like the starters. So to keep things a little bit more organized in the end, I decided to take care of all of that immediately. Now, normally in the Pokemon games, there's a small collection of version exclusives to incentivize either finding another person to trade with, or reluctantly buying the other copy. In total, there are 33 version exclusives that need to be obtained, which to my knowledge is the most out of any main series games pre-DLC, which really drives the point of how much they wanted this to be a social Pokemon game. At the end of the day, this is only about 17 evolution lines that need to be bred or evolved, so I really just aimed to get one of them. But if I came across the other, I figured it'd be worth attempting to get that too. The copy of White 2 that I was using was actually the childhood copy that I first played all the way back in 2012, which begs the question, how am I gonna get Reshiram? Funnily enough, Reshiram was still in this game. A long time ago when X and Y released, I transferred most of the Pokemon in this save file to help with the Pokedex, but there are a few that were banned from being moved. Because you can fuse Reshiram and Zekrom with Kyurem in the other games, I guess there's some complication with keeping track of both their stats if you don't split them up before transferring to newer games, so I just left him in the box. After using the splicer on them, I was able to get back my 11-year-old Reshiram, completely unused after all this time. I decided to explore a little bit more, which is when things started to get really interesting. I must have got it already. There's no way. Here's the thing, chat. I transferred a ton of Pokemon into this game because I love Diamond and Pearl, so when I had the opportunity, I just threw them all into this game. This is the copy I had as a kid, and I didn't even do a legendary event. That's kind of sad. After spending way too long catching that, I grabbed a few more on the list and then decided to call it a day, considering that I had been catching Pokemon for about 10 hours straight. At the end of the stream, I managed to catch another 124 Pokemon, bringing the total to 182 out of the 300 that I needed. On day 4, I decided to speed up the process of collecting the remaining Pokemon before the grind by playing both games at the same time. After scanning through the Pokedex a second time, I ended up missing out on a couple forgettable ones like Corsola, so I spent about 15 minutes collecting all of those before I was truly done. In my copy of White 2, I decided to catch a Ditto to trade over, as that will drastically improve the rate in which I receive eggs when I inevitably have to breed for both of the Pokedexes. I then traded over everything I had on White 2, and because I also had some additional copies that were super early in the game for the Metal Quest, I traded over the starters, which had interesting names. To get some more easy Dex entries, I took that Ditto and immediately started breeding everything on my list. Now, if you watched my video early this year where I spent a ridiculous amount of time to hatch a shiny Zorua in this game, just know that this will be a lot easier. Aside from having significantly less Pokemon to get and having access to a Pokemon with the ability Flame Body, I also have a little trick up my sleeve. By having a Japanese copy of the games nearby while you're playing, you can activate a hatching pass power, which will improve the speeds even more, which is good because this still took 2.5 hours to do. During the process, I was able to add another 25 Pokemon in my collection, but now was the real grind. I think it's pretty common knowledge that battling against Audino can earn you a pretty insane amount of experience in this game, and I wanted to take full advantage of that. After the discovery of changing the wild encounter spawns to get rare Pokemon, I dove deeper into learning how the other past powers could benefit me, and I found there was a way to boost your experience heavily in battle. By enabling this and exploring power, I was able to find Audino pretty consistently at the expense of using a pretty large chunk of my pass orbs every time. With this, I was able to evolve my Tepig into Emboar in only 2 battles, so it's safe to say that this didn't take too long, right? Wrong. Over the span of 3 hours, I managed to evolve 30 Pokemon, which on paper doesn't sound awful, but we've got a lot of Pokemon to get. To give myself a little bit of credit, I spent a decent chunk of the time evolving all the hard ones like Hydreigon and Klinklang, but after all this, as well as the 3 prior days, I was burnt out. I decided to take a quick nap and I got back to work the same night to compensate, but I decided to work on something a little bit different. As you know by now, complete the Pokedex is a task that requires you to use multiple games, and the Generation 5 games are arguably the most diverse. In order to complete the regional Pokedex, you need to see all of the main legendaries that are in the game, those being the original box art legendaries, Kyurem, the 3 Swords of Justice, and the 3 roaming genies. There are only 3 that I haven't covered, so how do you get them in game? The answer is you don't. For some reason, these 3 Pokemon were removed and are only accessible through transferring or buying Pokemon Dream Radar. This is a 3DS title where you essentially shoot and collect orbs and catch Pokemon with their hidden abilities. I don't think there's really too much to say about this game mode, aside from the fact that every time you scan the radar, you have to wait in real time for them to come back, but by using your 3DS Play coins and date skipping, you can constantly farm points to advance in the game. After about 4 hours of clicking the A button, I was able to catch the first 2 and unlock the ability to catch Landorus, which I planned for the next stream. Back in Black 2, I spent the night grinding out the rest of the evolutions, and although it took me nearly 4 hours, I was able to add over 30 new Pokemon to the dex, including a lot of difficult ones like Haxorus, evolution items like Weavile, and even the friendship evolutions like Umbreon and Espeon. After reaching the bottom of the Pokedex once again, I managed to collect 268 Pokemon, which left me with evolving all the stone evolutions and a few more really specific ones on the list. With the kinda end in sight, I spent the morning trying to obtain all of the remaining evolution items that I needed, but I also had an additional goal. I wanted to up the stakes, so I told my chat if I didn't find a shiny Pokemon during the stream, I'd have to give out 500 subs. For the most part, getting everything I needed was relatively straightforward, but for some of them, I had to get a little creative. Am I honestly stupid or what? Like, I have no clue how to get there. That's it. I'm cheating. I'm getting my sons down. I decided to use the past powers again to try and expedite the process, and I'll be honest, I don't know if it really worked. Although I found most of the Pokemon at a relatively quick pace, in comparison to the first time I used this power to increase rare spawns, I wasn't getting as lucky. Even the game was making a point as to how much time was being spent doing this. Randy's playing time has exceeded 30 hours. That was just a call for help. Hey, somebody check on Randy. He's not doing too well. With all the special Pokemon found, I just needed to grab a pincer and I was ready to finish the dex. After taking care of the trait evolutions, I took all the evolution stones and obtained the final 14 Pokemon that I needed, and I was fully prepared to finish this part of the challenge. With that done, chat, yes, I've successfully completed the regional dex. We jump into my Pokedex. You will see I have collected. It's not good. What is it? Yeah, so I may have forgotten that I purposely saved Landorus for the last one in the game, but thankfully the process to get it isn't that bad. I learned that this is not a sitting down game, so I'm gonna have to get into gamer position. I don't need a chair. I got it. I got him. Oh, no. Speak to me. With the final member of the regional dex registered, it was time to finish things up. Amazing, truly amazing. You've met all of the Pokemon in the Unova region. Here's a gift to thank you for all of your hard work. And with that, we receive the permit. I can learn to drive. Now, although we're done, you might have noticed that I said there were 300 Pokemon in the dex, so where are the other 3 that I don't have? These are reserved for the mythical Pokemon, and it's important to note that there were actually 301, as Victini is entry number 0 all the way at the top for some reason. Despite these Pokemon no longer being available, with the power of the internet, we can change our Wi-Fi settings to connect to a custom server that contains all the limited time events available for this game. Unfortunately, the ones that you receive are completely random, so for the time being, I was only able to obtain Genesect and Keldeo, but we'll come back to all this later. We have a lot more important business. With the permit that we received from Professor Juniper, we're able to enter a special area called the Nature Preserve, and this is where things started to get interesting.
Hey, John. It seems like you will be given 500 subs today after all. There is no way you are going to get a shinny.
Not so fast, Shadow. John is a Pokemon master, and he still has a secret trick under his sleeve.
That's right.
Isn't that right, John?
That's right, Obama. Oh my god! That's right, baby. If you complete the regional dex in Pokemon Black 2 White 2, they give you a shiny Haxorus. Aside from finding this area does contain a lot of Pokemon in the National Pokedex, so I spent a little time beginning the even larger mountain that I needed to climb. Ooh! Okay, that's actually rare. That's actually rare. It's not sex, but it's close. It's like passionate kissing. So from here, I took a small break catching Pokemon. As you probably know, catching every Pokemon is in reality a very small, but also very big part of obtaining every medal in the game. But when I was looking at essentially a month straight of non-stop gaming, I figured that it'd be a lot more enjoyable if I took a small break from catching. I had to take on things like completing the Battle Subway and other competitive formats, so I grabbed a few new faces like Cloyster and even using that Magma Stone to get Heatran. But it's important to remember that even early on when I was going route to route, I was catching whatever I knew I didn't have, and I wasn't checking to see if it was in the regional dex or not. In total, I collected a whopping 30 Pokemon, but now it was time to play my favorite part of this game. Okay, so this shouldn't really come as a shock, but they didn't include every Pokemon between both copies of Black 2 and White 2, so we're going to have to use some outside resources to get there. The Gen 4 games are known to basically contain every Pokemon in one method or another, and just like how I tackled the regional dex, I decided to hunt them all down in order. The process to get each Pokemon wasn't necessarily just naturally walking into a route though. The first Pokemon I grabbed was Caterpie, which is not normally available in these games. However, if you have a copy of Pokemon Fire Red inserted into your DS, you can encounter this as well as 24 other Pokemon that are all basically more convenient to get in these games. That might have been a lie considering that Ekans took over 20 minutes to find, and that's besides the point. In addition, there are a lot of Pokemon that are exclusively encounterable through the Poke Radar. For the most part, these are quick to encounter with a 12% chance of appearing, but there are a few rare encounters like Miltank and Tauros that can take a bit longer as their percentages are split in the same area. For about an hour, I went through catching everything available within Kanto, when it came time to collect a special group of Pokemon. By talking to Professor Oak in Eterna City, it will activate Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres as roaming legendaries. After accidentally leaking the secret 4th bird on my Poketch, okay, I had a foolproof game plan to make it as easy as possible. I don't have a Master Ball. Let's come back to this in a bit. After a few more hours of playing, I managed to catch everything I needed from Gens 1 through 3, and I figured that I should end the day grabbing arguably the hardest Pokemon to get in Gen 4. Spiritomb is known to be pretty annoying in older games, as in Platinum you need to interact with 32 people underground before you can fight it, and although you can just talk to the same person over and over, I knew there was an easier way. If you make it far enough in Pokemon Dream Radar, there's a small chance you can encounter one, and it took all of 15 minutes to be able to say that I had it and was ready to transfer to my main save file. The following day, I finished grabbing a few Pokemon in Platinum that I needed, which included getting nearly all the starter Pokemon from the previous gens through either transferring or trading. The next group of Pokemon were unfortunately another set of roaming Pokemon, the legendary beasts. Because I was already having trouble getting the 3 birds, I had a little bit of a backup plan instead. We hack. Back in the day, local Pokemon events were distributed through a special DS cartridge, and although these were supposed to be sent back to Nintendo, some of them slipped through the cracks. I obviously found my copies on the side of the road, but with this I was able to get the legendary beasts as well as all the mythicals that are no longer available, including a secret Celebi event that was never released to the public. With this, I was completely done with Platinum, so I made my way over the Johto region to clean up the rest. As you can probably assume, this process was basically the same. However, if there's anything you should know about Johto, it's that some Pokemon are insanely rare to find. To make the concept of swarms a little bit more appealing, a lot of Pokemon like Snubbull have a 1% encounter rate, and while you can find it in Black 2, it's exclusively in one hidden grotto, which unfortunately would take even more time to respawn encounters. Another small feature we had to take advantage of are the headbutt trees. All across the region, there are trees that can reward you with a Pokemon encounter. However, in certain locations, there are some that give you exclusive Pokemon, most notably the Honey Tree Pokemon from Gen 4. This is obviously an astronomical time save, as you can just farm encounters over and over instead of waiting in Platinum, and basically all of the trees are relatively easy to find and encounter. During this process, I did come across a nice find. Bird. Now, I'm not entirely sure why I thought the birds would be easier to catch as roamers when I had a save file with them completely untouched, but regardless, I was able to grab Zapdos, Moltres, and eventually Articuno as I made my way around the region. While Heart Gold and Soul Silver are known for containing most of the first 2 gens of Pokemon, a lot of people might not know that most of Gen 3 and even 4 is available. It's just that they're all confined into 2 modes. The first and most notable is the Safari Zone. Although while walking around you can only encounter Pokemon from Kanto and Johto, with the power of few shrubs and trees, you can spawn what feels feels like an endless variety of Pokemon. Thankfully, I only really need the electric line because the process of laying down items and removing them is not intuitive at all, but if I ever need to come back, it's always a relatively fast option. The second method to get later gen mons is through, oddly enough, the radio. On specific days, you can activate Hoenn and Sinnoh sounds, which will boost the chances of encountering Pokemon from their respective regions. Although the encounter rate is pretty high, for some reason they made it so it only works for one encounter, so every time you want to re-encounter in the grass, you need to activate the radio, which is insanely dumb, but this opened up the ability to get a crazy amount of new finds, as there are almost 20 lines of Pokemon you can encounter throughout both regions. After scanning through the entire map, I was only left with a few more legendary encounters. I decided to go for Mewtwo first, which was quite the experience. All right. That's messed up. That is a sick joke. Straight to jail. Do not pass go. Are you kidding me? This is torture! I am getting rolled! After spending 40 minutes dealing with that, it would seem like we were all done, but there are a couple more legendaries that people are quick to forget. After completing the game, if you go and talk to Mr. Pokemon, he'll present you with either the red or blue orb depending on your version, and if you head west of Cianwood City, you can enter the embedded tower to battle either Groudon or Kyogre. It's important to note that you can also obtain Rayquaza, which requires you to trade over the opposite Pokemon, and because I needed to grab some version exclusive anyways, I was able to take care of all this pretty quickly. With a few more event Pokemon added to my collection, I was basically done with all of Generation 4, which meant it was time to head back to Black 2. Kinda. As you probably have noticed, I'm missing a lot of key exclusive Pokemon, most notably the box legendaries. In most cases, you have to replay all of Platinum and the Gen 2 games to get them, but if you play Pokemon Dream Radar with one of the DS games inserted, it unlocks a secret mode where you can catch each of the legendaries from the 5 games. This process is insanely quick, and I was able to get a couple rare encounters like Rotom along the way. The next day, I took care of a couple cleanup encounters that I was originally going to catch through the daily swarms and hitting grottos, but considering how tedious that would be compared to just going in the grass and looking for 2 minutes, I figured it would be the better play. With all of that sorted, it was time for the big transfer. In order to get all the Pokemon from Gen 4 to Gen 5, you need to use a feature called Poke Transfer. With this, you're able to take 6 Pokemon at a time and play a mini game where you launch Pokeballs to re-catch them. Believe it or not, I've played my fair share of this game mode, so it wasn't exactly difficult to do, but the sheer mass of Pokemon I had to transfer was pretty alarming. Between all the games, it took me nearly 45 minutes to move everything, but with all of them consolidated into the main copy, it was time to see my new total. 450. Okay, but we've got basically all of the lines in some way, so I either have to breed or I have to evolve them. Although I did say I had everything, I more so meant outside of this game. There are still a few more rare encounters that need to be found, most notably the Reggies. Deep in the Clay Tunnel, you can access the area where they appear. However, the process in getting them isn't so simple. Just like the GBA games, the requirements to get them to appear is cryptic and arguably the hardest in the series. Rather than using a special move or having certain Pokemon in your party, this requires a lot more technical skill, so much so that even the most skilled players will—
This is a switch. This is just a little switch right here. We just click that.
After catching Regirock, the game enables access to the Iron Chamber, which unlocks the key system feature in the game. Basically, how this works is you have the ability in the main menu to change the chamber you enter to catch each of the Reggie trio. However, not all of them are available. Regice is exclusive to White 2, but if you use the key transfer system and connect to another game, you're able to unlock all 3 chambers on one copy. This key feature also extends to other aspects of completing this challenge that we'll talk about in a bit, but with all 3 Reggies on the team, I was also able to catch Regigigas. The remaining encounters for this challenge were almost exclusively water encounters and the rest of the fossil Pokemon that I started working on in the beginning. I did manage to catch Cresselia on the Marvelous Bridge and Azelf on Route 23, and with one of every single line of Pokemon collected, it was time to see the current total. I needed to evolve 162 Pokemon. On the 10th day of the Medal Rally, I organized every Pokemon in order that I needed to evolve, and immediately started working on easily the most overwhelming task in this challenge. Now, if you remember from earlier, the Audino battles were effective, but still extremely time-consuming, so I looked into better options. This brings us to the White Forest. Now, you're probably thinking, you're playing Black 2, how does that even make sense? And thankfully with the same key system that we use for the Reggies, we can swap between Black City and White Forest at our leisure. Within these areas, we could take on hordes of high-level battles, and although at their core they do the exact same thing, White Forest offers breeder trainers that offer a considerable amount more experience. Initially, the amount was pretty similar to Audino, but that's only because I was in the lowest level area of the map. Considering that I needed to take on this area anyways for a few more medals, I ran through these areas evolving full teams of Pokemon until I eventually reached the final battle all the way at the bottom of Area 10. After making my way through the entire challenge in 4 hours, I was able to evolve 35 Pokemon, and that number was only going to go up. This number would have been significantly higher if I already completed it, as I basically evolved everything in the first few battles, and then I had to carry them all the way through the area to complete them. But now that I could just leave whenever I was ready, I was going to make some extreme progress. Over the next 3 hours, I managed to evolve another 50 entries in my national dex, bringing my final total of the day to 572 Pokemon, which is nearly 100 more than I had the day before. I knew that realistically I can complete the rest tomorrow, but I was going to have to really grind to get there. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you might have noticed there's no way I need to evolve another 80 Pokemon, and thankfully, you're right. A decent chunk of the remaining Pokemon are actually ones that need to be bred at the daycare, and while this may sound straightforward, there are actually quite a few that have multi-evolutions like Wurmple, and there are a few item-holding breeds like Wynot and Munchlax. From here, I went around obtaining every evolution and trade item that I needed, and while for the most part there were things I could pick up off the ground, a few of them weren't as kind. I need to obtain 2 King's Rocks to evolve Poliwhirl and Slowpoke, and while you can obtain one in Nuvema Town, the second one can only be found on Wild Poliwhirl. While this may seem impossible because of how rare it is to just encounter that Pokemon, I knew a workaround. At the Flacessi Ranch through the Rippling spots, you have a 65% chance to encounter one, and by having a Compound-Eyes Galvantula in the front of my party, the rate for one holding a King's Rock increases from 5% to 20%. Even though this sounds like it's in the bag, for some reason I was finding nothing but Basculin. Even with the boosted pass power to increase water spots, this took over 20 minutes to obtain this one item. As I was setting up for the final trades, I realized I was having an issue with the Deep Sea scale. We don't have it! Everyone panic! Those are a bunch of Pokemon you can rob for the scale? Wait, in black too? Like whom? Wild Blue Basculin have it? So this whole time, all those Basculin I ran from could have had it. Oh, Chad, this is so bad. Everyone go back to the ranch. Why does Blue Basculin have the pink scale? After then finding out that Chinchou basically gave them away for free, I traded 14 Pokemon to evolve and then took care of all the stone evolutions I had organized in my PC boxes. Believe it or not, but at this point, I had only 1 Pokemon left. After completing the Black Tower, I was gifted a Gibble, and I figured that it would be cool to evolve a Shiny as my last Pokemon. I know. With a few battles in the White Tree Hollow, I was able to get Gabite to level 48 and finally obtain Garchomp. We did it! The Dex is done! And now we check. Did I actually get everything in the Dex? What am I missing? Seedot! Volbeat and Illumise, I saw them at the beginning of stream. Chat, I am so confident those are by far the most underwhelming and disappointing Pokemon to not have in the Dex. After transferring my 2 Ladybugs and hatching 1 small acorn, I was able to confidently say that I had caught all 649 Pokemon in Pokemon Black 2. Excluding the break I took from catching, I managed to complete everything in a little over a week and about 60 hours. But now it was time for the big reward. Hey John, you're here to show me your Pokedex, how your Pokedex is coming along, right? Yep, I see. 649 Pokemon top to bottom, we got them all, baby. This blows me away. It's so wonderful, I'm at a loss for words. You've accomplished something truly outstanding. Filling up the National Dex makes you a trainer among trainers. I'm so happy I was able to meet a fantastic trainer like you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Surely he's just thinking. Surely he's just thinking of a cool thing to give us. You know, like, we'll just give him a moment. We'll just give him a second. Yep, showing the Dex. Showing the Dex to you. We get something good. Yep. And then we should just check in with him tomorrow.